I'm Daniel. I'm a co-founder and doula at the Virtual Death Doula Network. Andrea?
I'm Andrea, also co-founder and doula at the Virtual Death Doula Network.
I am Inti. I am not a co-founder, but I am a death doula. So,
And
Thank
a
you.
very wonderful part of our network.
yes, I didn't do all the hard lifting labor, but here regardless.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. And I've already sort of like chimed in about where we're from and whatnot, but we've got another sort of like icebreaker question in the form of sort of what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given. And again, feel free to throw it in the chat or unmute yourself and shout it out loud. Obviously, it might take a minute or two to think about it. Yeah, what is the best piece of advice?
I will go ahead and start just because it popped right up. But the best piece of advice that I've been offered is that everything is temporary. And while that can sort of seem scary about some things, it is really, really comforting when it comes to most things. So most moods, most situations, most everything, including life, is temporary. So knowing that it will pass makes me feel really comfortable and more relaxed about things.
Yeah, good point. The phrase I have that goes along with that is everything that has a beginning has an end, because the material realm, absolutely, everything is temporary. Although I also believe that there's a realm above the material where things are a little bit more permanent. For what that's worth. I don't know if that's, well, that's my chiming in on that. Anyone else?
I would say a friend told me that equal parts compassion, humility, and self-advocacy is a really great way to move with conflict in relationships. And I've taken that just like a recipe, like 1/3 compassion, 1/3 humility, 1/3 self-advocacy. And that's really helped me not burn all my bridges.
And Shelley, I see you DM me. I don't know if that was meant to go to the entire group. Your mindset of being about death is inevitable. It'd be well planned whenever possible. Absolutely. Like we're all going to die. Like welcome to the death salon. And pushing away from that is generally not helpful, but at the same time, it's totally understandable depending upon where you're at in life. And like it is potentially very scary, of course. Well, again, like it just potentially, because again, it's the more you sort of like meditate on it and get into it and sort of think about it, it can become much, the fear can be released and it can be approached with a sense of curiosity or wonder even. And that certainly changes everything. When that fear goes away, that sort of changes the way you can live your life as well. And I know that that's not the focus of this particular death salon, but so I'll get off my soapbox now about it. But thank you, Shelley, for giving me the prompt to talk about that.
I'm going to hop up on that box just for a second to say that the piece Shelley said about well planned where you can, that actually gives you a lot of control over not only the death parts, but really more about the life parts and how you're going to live up until the moment you die. That is what the planning does. And that is how you can have a good death, whatever that means to you. But again, that is also for perhaps another day. But thank you.
And just to wrap that up, I have recently started to enact and plan my own VSAD passing in when it's appropriate. And that is absolutely giving me so much peace. It's amazing how I feel in control and I feel comforted. So yeah, learning to deal with death, knowing it's inevitable is the real peace right there.
That is really wonderful to hear. And we are glad that you are finding peace and hopefully some liberation in that as well.
Yeah. Cool. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to talk about, be it death or again, the best piece of advice? We kind of took the best piece of advice and kind of steered it back towards talking about death. But if anybody's got advice that they want to share that is not death related, that is certainly welcome as well.
And again, if you don't feel comfortable speaking, you can always type it right into the chat and where it just says for everyone, and we'll all see it.
Yeah, you don't have to do that if you don't want to either. All right. I think that we're about, I'm gonna call it on that. And before we go any further, I'll do a little breathing exercise to get us all centered and grounded. This is one that I've done before, but not for a little while, I think. Some box breathing. So that way that looks is we'll breathe in for a few seconds, hold it for a few seconds, breathe out for a few seconds, hold the out breath for a few seconds, and just do that for like maybe a minute or so. And I'll just count down the breaths as we do it. So find a comfortable place to sit. And when you're ready, let's start breathing in. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Out. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale. 4, 3, 2, 1. And go ahead and return to your normal breathing at this time. I hope you all enjoyed that. A little centering and grounding. I'm unable to do that while I'm leading that, but that's okay. I did a little bit before we started, and yay, always a big fan of any breathing exercise. Breath is a great way to get back into your body for sure. So, yeah, let's get started. This is a grief-focused death salon. Going to be similar in nature to the previous one. Just say that there are many sides of grief. And we're going to highlight some of the challenging aspects as well as the opportunities for growth and gratitude here today. And we're inviting you all to share a handful of your grief and a place where you found joy. That's what we're focusing on right now, like peace, gentleness, ease, gratitude, joy around your grief. Not something that is discussed maybe as much, but this is a safe space to have an open conversation about the many facets of grief and death, of course. And as always, participation is entirely optional. To help facilitate this, we've compiled a set of quotes. Andrea and I are going to read the first 2 quotes, and then we'll popcorn among the last few. If you're called upon, feel free to read and continue to call on to the next person. If you don't want to share, that's fine too. You can pass or remain silent. We've got plenty of quotes for the number of people we have today, so yay. I'm going to share my screen for the first 2 quotes for Andrea and I, and then we will slide on to the next slide for the remaining quotes. So let me share screen. There we are. And slideshow. So, yeah, we start with the first one saying that the agony is great, and yet I will stand it. Had I not loved so much, I would not hurt so much. But goodness knows I would not want to diminish that precious love by 1 fraction of an ounce. I will hurt, and I will be grateful for the hurt that hurt to sit bears witness to the depth of our meeting. And for that, I will be eternally grateful. And I, of course, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the one on who knows the authority on grief. Andrea.
All right. Grief often surprises us because it doesn't come knocking for permission. It shows up on its own timeline. It can show up in our mourning and in our joy. It can show up when our hearts have expanded and have taken the risk to love and care for another. It can show up whenever it needs to work through or move energy around inside us. It can show up when it might be time to make space for something new. It can show up when we need to be reminded of our humanity. It can show up when we might be holding on to certainty and are resisting a frightening yet necessary change. That is brought to us from Sylvie K, and something that I think is just really poignant. And now I am going to go ahead and call on Shelley, if you would like to read the next quote at the top of the page.
You do find a place for life, a way to hold it and live with it. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
And then Shelley, if you want to call on someone, feel free.
Well, the only people I can see right now will be Inti, besides you and Daniel, sorry.
Yay, because I love this
No
quote.
worries.
How did you know? How did you know this is my favorite one? This is what I did not expect. How unfamiliar joy can be when you have spent so much time wondering if the grief would ever end. Brian Andreas? Yeah. I'm going to read it one more time. Sorry. This is what I did not expect. How unfamiliar joy can be when you have spent so much time wondering if the grief would ever end. I'm going to call on, feel free to just be silent and I can choose someone else. Iva?
Hello.
Hi.
Sometimes the only appropriate response is to grieve and celebrate at the same time. Hani Nicholas.
And I'm going to go ahead and read this last one. Communal grieving offers something that we cannot get when we grieve by ourselves. Through acknowledgement, validation, and witnessing, communal grieving allows us to experience a level of healing that is deeply and profoundly freeing. So bona fide some. And we chose to leave that one last because here we all are. And we thought that was important. So what I would like to know is I'm curious to hear which quotes or quote really resonated the most with anyone, or alternatively made you feel just like, ew, I don't like that at all.
Yeah, and I'll leave these quotes up. If anybody wants to go back to one of the ones on the previous slide, just let me know and I'll back up the slides so you can look at those as well.
I truly find a lot of comfort in this. Sometimes the only appropriate response is to grieve and celebrate at the same time. That's how I view death. I am grieving. I am missing that person physically, but I always feel like I want to celebrate what we did together, what she did, I did, he did. Memories make the pain a little more bearable in my mind anyway.
I love that. So it sounds like that when you're able to visit those memories, even though it's bittersweet, you are finding joy.
Absolutely.
And some peace surrounding your grief.
I can't tell you how many times I feel a nudge from beyond, and I know that nudge. I know exactly where it came from and why. And that's a celebration to me that they're still there. I get it.
I love that. Anybody else have a quote that they either really resonated with or were super averse to? I'll go ahead, Inti.
I wanted to, the one that I read is really beautiful to me, because when I've been in like the throes of grief, like I lost a friend a few months ago, it was wild to me how the emotional tone of everything changed. Like my beautiful apartment with all of my plants and my candles and all of these things that I had like set up, it didn't matter because it all just took on a different tone. And so I think that even though we all know that things are temporary, it feels like a really validating quote, because I think we also know when we've struggled, one of the biggest feelings I've had is I lose my sense of linear time. And so even though I know that it'll end, I can't, the feeling doesn't resonate with me. It feels like it'll just last forever. Yeah, so I just liked the honesty in that quote a lot.
Interestingly enough, that quote is like, I love that quote. And it's one that I've held very dear to me, actually throughout losing my parents, and a number of other people, because I found, grief can be all consuming, and that we can forget what joy feels like. And beyond even forgetting what it feels like, it can actually feel uncomfortable to feel joy. In fact, feeling joy can feel like it's a betrayal to our grief, but it's not. It is okay. In fact, it's fantastic to feel joy and happiness. It's okay to find spaces where the light comes in and we feel good, no matter how momentary it may feel. It's okay to let in a little light and to remember that spark of joy, even in the deepest of griefs. I know that I had a really hard time reintegrating joy and play back in when I was in the deep depths of my grief, because it felt like I was somehow betraying my grief, or that if I loosened my grip on it, that maybe I would lose it or that person. However, when I let go of that and I learned to start to find some little pieces of joy, I found that I also was able to make more peace with my grief and find more joyful pieces of grief as well. So even though it was bittersweet and I missed the person, I would see something and be like, oh my God, my mom would totally hate that. And I would find it amusing, because it was just kind of a funny thing. So that really resonated with me as well. And I'm curious if anyone else has ever experienced feeling uncomfortable with joy or happiness or anything of the like when grieving.
Hi, this is
Yeah, I think,
Iva.
go ahead, yeah,
Shall I go?
please.
So it's very interesting that when you are grieving and you have those spurts of joy that come through when you're grieving, it gives you a feeling that, yeah, I should be grieving, but I get these moments where the feelings that bring me joy from, say, my parents, and the interesting and funny things that they did while you're in the process of grieving help, I believe, with your healing and getting through your grief.
Agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the hard part, well, potentially hard part is being, again, not feeling guilty about having those feelings. Like, I think that's sort of what people might get hung up on, is those feelings, because it's natural that those feelings of joy when they come up. Like, we don't, like, the feelings that are going to move through us, we don't necessarily have a lot of control over that. Like, the way we live and approach life does give us some sort of almost global, like, way of moving through life, and will influence the emotions that move through us. But when they actually come up, they're there, whether we want them to or not. And if joy comes up in the process of, well, you're in the middle of grief, well, joy just came up in the middle of grief, and feeling guilty about it is not really helpful in any way, shape, or form, and is only going to potentially make you feel worse in the long run. So it's sort of getting okay with whatever emotions do happen to come up, even if they're unexpected, and not necessarily something that society says, oh, you shouldn't be feeling joy at this point, you should be grieving. Like, it's, whatever you're feeling is whatever you're feeling, and to be in denial or to push away from whatever that is just not helpful. Like, you're going to grieve, like, that's part of the process, and like, but you're also going to be feeling other emotions coming up in weird and odd ways as you're going through that process. And part of the practice is being okay with whatever those things are as they come up and not judging them.
And piggybacking on that, grief is so interesting in that, say you're going through a year, of someone passing in your life, and then you know, all of a sudden this overwhelming feeling of sadness and grief and tearfulness comes over you, and it just like, it's like you have no control over it. It just kind of appears, but you know, then it passes. It's so interesting.
It
Yeah.
really is. And I think culturally we're very confused about grieving, because there's this idea that it's supposed to be so heavy, you know, and that you shouldn't be happy, or you shouldn't do things that bring you joy, or that you know, you should sit in a dark room or whatever it is. But that's why I really like the quote that says sometimes the only appropriate response is to grieve and celebrate at the same time. Those things are true. And Inti in our last death salon talked about another word for grief is praise. And we don't often think about that, but it is when we speak the memories and the names and all of the things of the people we've lost, that creates a beautiful magic. And it keeps, you know, I feel it keeps people very much alive and present. And so we do get to celebrate that. And also, you know, I think that's the thing that's hard about grief too, is that they're like sneaker waves. You know, you could be totally fine, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, it's like a gut punch. And that, you know, that can feel really confusing, but there's no right way to grieve, and there's no timeline. So, you know, if in the beginning of your grief, you're not crying and people think, oh my God, why aren't you crying? You're not crying, and that's okay. You know, 5 years later, you may have a tsunami. That would be okay too.
I think in terms of like how I've experienced grief and joy is sometimes like the barrier between the two. There's like a metaphor of like strength, where it's either strong like a rope or it's strong like a piece of glass to where it shatters really easily. And I think the moments in which I've been able to watch something that makes me laugh or experience a lot of joy, it's like a direct connection to my grief. And I end up like, I don't know if anyone's had that experience where they're laughing and then all of a sudden just like tears come up and you just start weeping. Maybe it was just me, but I think there's a lot of ideas around, like I've thought a lot about when I'm feeling guilty about not experiencing joy, where that comes from. And sometimes it comes from like feeling ashamed because the person who isn't like on, you know, the physical plane or alive would be upset with me if they knew that I like moved on, or like these ideas of like joy that we have. And, you know, I was really fortunate enough to like lose someone who literally told his friends that he wanted a dance party if he ever died. And I think how much of a gift that was, because otherwise I don't think people would have felt, I think people would have felt guilty if they were like, let's have this like dance party with all this food. And so, you know, since then I've tried to remind people in my life of like, hope I don't die for a long time, but if I do, you know, I want you to be happy and celebrate life. And that's how I want to be remembered. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Sort of like
go ahead, Daniel.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's sort of like giving permission to folks to be joyful. And I guess that's part of like, you know, folks, I guess it's like, it is helpful to get permission. You don't obviously don't need permission. And ultimately you need to give yourself permission to feel that joy. But I can understand how, if someone who happened to pass had given you the go ahead, would make it easier to do that without sort of any sort of societal pressures to not do so. But ultimately, yeah, we're allowed to give ourselves that own permission, and ultimately we have to give ourselves that permission to be joyful about whatever might have happened.
Yeah, that was something that was integral for me and incredibly challenging. I had a very hard time accessing joy or feeling okay with feeling joy. It scared me. And as I mentioned before, it felt like a betrayal. I felt like if I loosened my grip on my grief, that I was loosening my grip on that person and what we shared, and that I wasn't honoring it. And it is not the case. And while I still cry, there's a lot of ways to honor people and a lot of ways to celebrate. And so I still grieve. So I don't think it ever really goes away, but I've found a lot of growth in my grief, and I've found peacefulness, and I've found joy. I've found things I can laugh about, you know, like I can make rice like a champ, My mom could not make rice to save her life. So every time I make rice, I'm like, oh my God, Mom, I just made the most awesome batch of perfect rice. And it's a celebration for me. And I think she is also giggling. And there was a while where I would make rice and be like, my mom had no idea I could make rice. It really just took me a little change of perspective to be like, hey, Mom, I can make this awesome rice.
Can you go back to the first page of quotes, Daniel? Is that possible?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, actually looking at that, that second quote seems to be the thing that we've been talking most about so far, as far as like emotions kind of popping up here and there and willy-nilly whenever, and what we do with them when they come up. Thank you, Sylvie K, for providing that. So
Yeah, I'm really, really drawn to the whole quote, but particularly the last line. It can show up when we might be holding on to certainty and are resisting a frightening yet necessary change. You know, maybe, you know, to me, it's saying grief is the vehicle. Grief is the way we get to heal. When we are able to express what we hold inside, we can move. So a lot of times, even though it's painful, grief can be a really beautiful gift.
yeah, I would like to generalize that even more whenever you're able to sort of recognize and honor what's inside, be it grief or anything else. It's a same thing, beautiful gift to be able to do that in general. Obviously, grief is one specific emotion that you can do that with, but again, being able to do that with whatever happens to come up is helpful and healthy and life affirming.
So I wonder if there's anyone that would like to share, or anyone else that would like to share a place where they have found some peace within their grief, or maybe a place where they haven't, where they feel really stuck, because it is often two sides of one coin. And if you want to, feel free to unmute yourself and speak, put it in the chat, or absolutely don't say anything at all.
I don't want to talk if someone else wants to, but while there's silence, in this whole VSAD process, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, I've been reading a book written by the wife of a woman who helped her husband through the process. And he attended his own funeral. And when I read that passage, I thought, I absolutely want to be at my own funeral. Are you kidding? I mean, if you can, my family always had a wake where we were laughing. You didn't cry till the day you put the person in the ground, basically. And it sounds cold, but it's not, because we were sharing with people we hadn't seen in how long. There was so much joy in a room, if you really boil it down, when you're having a wake and people come from far and wide and you haven't seen them in how long. I'd like to be there to welcome them and to enjoy that last moment with them. That's where my grief will be solved, just by seeing them and having that one last happy connection. I'm good with that.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that so much.
Yeah, pre-mortem celebrations are very powerful and a great way to go. Like if you have some sort of awareness of when your time is coming and can have that sort of planning ahead of time, absolutely. Like I highly encourage that. It's a great way to like see everybody and really celebrate one last time while you still
And
are
it's
able to do so.
It's great because it is just this type of celebration and gathering that will help change the culture of death in this country, because it is very different here than in other places. Other countries have really elaborate death rituals and potentially a lot more comfort with death, dying, and the dead even. So I think moving towards spaces where we're honoring death instead of fearing it is beautiful and powerful, and creates a lot more peace. one person at a time and ripples outward to the whole world.
Yeah.
Which is
So thank you, everybody. Yeah, thank everybody for being here, to helping with that. So when we're done here, go out and tell everybody about talk to everybody about death and dying and grieving. Well, obviously that's a potentially a large task, but if you feel so called, please do so. And yeah, I'll leave that there.
Okay, and unless anyone else has anything to share, I think we'll probably go ahead and wrap this up. Oh, Inti, please share.
Sorry.
Yes.
Listening to Shelley, I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds so beautiful. It's also what I struggle with the most is because I grew up in such a small family, like I'm an only child. I didn't and we didn't just talk, like we didn't talk about death. I never went to a funeral. I struggle with asking for help or with putting myself in community with people. I just kind of become a little hermit, and I take my bag of grief and I go in the closet and I slowly shut the door. And so, yeah, I went to a vigil last night here in Minneapolis for someone that our community lost, and it was just too much for me. There was probably 100 people at least, and I needed to leave within 10 minutes because I wasn't used to being around that large group of people, and people were kind of poking me afterwards, messaging me being like, aren't you the death doula? And I'm like, it looks different for everyone, and we're allowed to, it's interesting how we perceive how we're supposed to grieve. I just needed to I felt really overwhelmed. And so I think for me, it's about knowing that however we need to grieve is valid. If it's in a small group of people, if it's in a large group of people, and it's allowed to be hard. I get really overwhelmed with large groups of people, and that's really frustrating because that's where a lot of the healing and the joy can happen. But I also know it's more important to respect my own kind of process. And no matter if my friends make fun of me or not for being the first one to leave and then being the only death doula in the space, I was just doesn't all look the same.
I think that's really important, and thank you for sharing that. It reminds me of a quote that barely didn't make the cut, but that all three of us loved. It's a very short quote by Sharon Salzberg, and it says, "Some things just hurt." And that's the bottom line. It's simple. Some things do just hurt. Losing someone hurts. Grief can hurt. It can feel uncomfortable, but it can also feel kind of sweet. You can find these, I don't know what you want to call them, these little moments of magic in them, where like Shelley was saying, she feels that nudge and she knows exactly where it comes from. I get that too, in all these tiny different ways, but I just know. And I find that really reaffirming and joyful. And I don't know, it always makes me smile. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate your time and sharing this space with us and sharing your words or your ears with us. We want to remind everybody that we do run off donations, and you can donate via PayPal or Venmo, and you will get a receipt for your donation. And we will be hosting another death salon in February. Information to follow, as well as a follow-up email from this one with the quotes and any resources.